Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Functionally Enlightened podcast today. We have a very special guest, Martin Pytela, who's a seasoned health coach and a metabolic typing advisor. So he knows firsthand the power of overcoming adversity and chronic illness, and he'll be sharing with us a lot. You'll see that he has a lot of similarities with some of the conditions that I've undergone. So after a debilitating health crisis, which was triggered by mercury fillings, he embarked on a decade-long journey of self-healing. Driven by a relentless pursuit of wellness, Martin immersed himself in the world of holistic health. He invested countless hours and resources to unlock the secrets of optimal health. Today, again, he shares his knowledge and expertise to empower others to take control of their lives and live life to the fullest. So, Martin, again, we're so thankful to have you on the show.
Sure. Happy to give off my time, I guess, paying it forward, right?
Right. Can you start us off today by telling us a little bit about the journey that led you into the health space?
Right. Well, I was a regular kid. I grew up in Czechoslovakia. My dad was a veterinarian. I was, well, first of all, I grew up in a police state, communist paradise. I I became a refugee when I was 24, left there, and I trusted professionals. I really had it ingrained in me that a professional, especially one with a diploma on the wall and a white lab coat on will be doing my best interest. So when I went for a dental checkup, that was about 2 years after the previous one, I spent some time in a refugee camp and just waiting for papers and all of that. I trusted the guy who said, "Oh, yeah, look at these x-rays. You need fillings."
Hmm.
And then he said, "Well, the insurance pays for the amalgam fillings." No, I think he called them silver fillings. And, but you can get the white ones if you want to pay extra. Nowhere was there a conversation about, by the way, that's mercury and you're going to possibly be reacting to the toxicity. I have the genetics with the MTHFR, so I'm a poor methylator. So yeah, I went down hard after that.
And you were not aware of that genetic predisposition before you went in for the
Of
procedure?
course not. Back then, I was a computer science and business administration major, so I had no clue.
Right. But you are a data analyst, so I'm sure you got into the weeds afterwards. So when was
Yeah.
it that you first experienced any type of symptoms, and what was it that pointed you to the possibility of this being like an implant illness?
Huh. Well, I started going bad quick. Like after the first set of fillings, I had a herpes breakout on my lip. So I was infected as an 18-year-old, and I broke up as a 25-year-old after the mercury went in.
Mm-hmm.
Sign one. A month after, my back went out. Just terribly, just bad. And then I had plantar fasciitis, carpal tunnel syndrome. And then my back really started to go badly. Like I had multiple events in which I would just, for 3 weeks at a time, 2 to 3 weeks at a time, I'd be just so debilitated. I couldn't lay on my back. So I was sleeping face down in a rocking chair, my forehead on the support on the footrest. And then I would roll off and crawl on all fours to the toilet, do the business, and crawl on all fours back um, to the rocking chair. And then eventually the body somehow figures it out and lets go. And I was able to resume normal activities.
So there was no additional procedures that you had afterwards to kind of mitigate that?
No. First, I went to the mainstream. I went to the general practitioner. He sent me to a orthopedic surgeon, and the surgeon gave me a cortisone shot into my heel, which totally took away the pain of the plantar fasciitis for 6 weeks. And then it came back worse than before. So clearly that was not the avenue. I saw chiropractors. I would go probably twice a week to deal with it because what happens is the mercury actually causes the weakening of the wrapping on the discs. So the discs that are between the vertebrae, they start weakening. And if you could visualize it as a underinflated tire on an automobile, the gravity is pushing it outward because it's weak. And so it pushes on the nerves, and also the whole structure becomes less stable. It just wobbles. So I would go to a chiropractor, have an adjustment, will be pain-free, great for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, varied. And then I would bend over to pick a sock off the floor and oh boy, I'm done again. I'm crawling home.
Yeah, so you don't want this temporary relief. You need to find the permanent solution and identify those hidden causes. So I'm assuming at this point you're starting to make the correlation between the events and the onset.
No,
No.
nothing. No. I was curious, so I actually had a hair trace mineral analysis done fairly early on, and it came back, and I'm reading mercury at 2.0, which is like 2 sigma outlier. And I kept wondering, I'm not eating tuna. Where did I get the mercury? I really did not know that it came from the amalgam. Anyway, so I finally hit the bottom. At some point I had this revelation that there's no way that the chiropractors and naturopaths and surgeons and whatever's are going to do anything for me. I was going to have to figure it out. And that's when I started reading books about natural healing and detoxification and therapies and like that. But that was probably 8 years in. Like I really was trusting the mainstream, and I was going along with the mainstream suggestions or the mainstream alternative. And I eventually got into really esoteric things like I can't even remember all the names of it. Alexander therapy, Bowen therapy. I can't remember all the names of it anymore. It's been 25, 35 years now. So it's been a while.
I can relate with that too, trying to find some type of healing modalities to offer relief or symptom abatement. So in my journey, I've done everything from cranial sacral therapy to osteopathic manipulations. I've done acupuncture, so many things. So were there any particular modalities that were beneficial to you and that you've kept them in as part of your routine?
Well, all of it worked, but it didn't solve the cause. We were sort of like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, so you're out of the wind, but you're still going to sink. Right. That's sort of an idea. At some point I started doing research, and at some point it dawned on me that it was the mercury. Oh yeah, mercury. You're high in mercury. And then somehow I connected the mercury to the breakdown of the tissues, and then I actually found that zeolite was excellent at absorbing toxins, and not just the metals, mercury, lead, cadmium, and so on, but also volatile organic compounds. So the formaldehydes and the likes, and the plastics and the likes, they all get attached and taken out of the body. So once I put myself on that, it was a rapid improvement of my situation.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's something that I use too. I kind of cycle some of the binders that I use, but for our audience who's not aware of what zeolite is, how to use it, can you let them know a little bit more about it?
Right. So zeolite is actually a mineral that is created when a volcano erupts under the ocean. And then, of course, movement of the tectonics and whatever, it ends up on the dry land 10 million years later. So we have mines for zeolite. And zeolite's very good absorber, so it's used for industrial spills, and it's used for cleaning aquariums and terrariums and you name it. And some sources are cleaner than others, and the cleaner ones are usable for human consumption, and they absorb things. So it's administered either as powders or capsules or even in liquids in suspension. Just different level of convenience.
And do you take that one away from any foods and medications similar to some binders?
Yeah, it's handy to take it on your empty stomach. That way it gets through, and does the absorption. You need to have a brand that's quite varied in sizes. The smallest ones get through the barriers and end up picking up the metals that may have even gotten into the brain.
Right, right.
The body is really clever in this sense that it hides toxins in tissues of low circulation, of which fat is one. So it goes on the belly fat, but unfortunately your brain is also fat, so it ends up there. And then it goes into the low circulation places like bones and cartilage and joints and the legs. So that's why all of this was affecting the mobility so much.
Yes, for sure.
Because the body's trying to shove it off into low circulation tissues, but ends up breaking it in the process.
Yeah, yeah. So you have a wide variety of symptoms that can affect all kinds of organ systems. And like you said, the pain, the musculoskeletal pain can be attributed to the heavy metal toxicity. And if you're not aware, well, we're exposed to toxins in our food sources, in the air, everywhere. But when you have a point source like that, that's like chronically leaching into your bloodstream, that's mercury amalgams, titanium implants, people who use you even think about the mesh implant community.
Yes.
They have plastic mesh, polypropylene, but there's also trace heavy metals in different, even silicone breast implants have heavy metals found in them. So all of that is like a chronic exposure. It's not just an acute exposure, and you have to perpetually either find a way to have an explant or find a way to mitigate on an ongoing basis.
Right. And so, yes, I was on plan B. I was on fairly high dose zeolite, and I had the mercury amalgams out only when I was 55. So I had them in for 30 years. You know, by the time I knew what I was doing, I also was no longer in the high earning jobs. So I'd had to wait a few years before I could get it out.
Right. And did you go to a biologic dentist to handle that?
Yes, definitely that. Yeah.
Maybe you can.
It was treated as a hazardous waste site. They themselves wore gas masks, and there was a very strong suction, and I was on a canula with oxygen up my nose and a rubber barrier in my mouth, and they were just drilling it out, because as they're drilling it, the mercury evaporates. So you do not want to inhale those vapors, for sure.
I know too many people who just go to a general dentist to have the removal done, and there's no protective equipment being used by either the dentist or the patient. And I've heard a statistic somewhere that dentistry has one of the highest rates of suicide and mental impairment. And I'm assuming that the reason why is they're having this exposure and their inhalation of this mercury amongst other toxins without any protection or without the knowledge that they should be better detoxing their bodies.
Actually, that's a good point. In my years of being toxic, I was not really actively working on a suicide, but I was definitely suicidal. Like I had so many dark moods. Going to sleep, lying in bed, thinking I just don't really want to wake up.
Yeah.
Like that. There was many years of it.
Yeah. I can relate with that piece as well. And a lot of people don't realize you may not present like the physical, the visual, they don't think that you're ill, but there's so many hidden illnesses happening. So how were people, I guess this is good for our audience, how were people trying to encourage you, or did they have any idea of what you were going through?
Not really. I was married, had small children. My kids were born about 10 years into my affair with mercury. So I was already working on my way out of it. But they still knew me as a guy whose back goes out and daddy's on the sofa for the day. Right?
Yeah.
That wasn't great.
No.
But, you know, my wife was busy raising the kids. At that point, I was earning rather well, so she was able to stay home with the kids. So she was running the house, and I was going to the office. Anyway,
yeah.
What to say about that? It's Uh, I was always putting on a brave face, right? Probably typical male behavior. Oh, I'll get over this, right? I mean, I always had that sort of I will overcome this, or this
Right.
is not going to take me down. So, and didn't.
Right. I mean,
I think this is actually a critical point. No matter what happens, how do you respond to that? I mean, all of us are faced with tragedies. All of us are faced with setbacks. It's the response. Becoming a victim is, the passive acceptance of that is not going to work.
mhm.
People I coach, I can easily say or tell who's going to have a successful outcome and who's not. And it's usually the people who take ownership of their situation
Right.
that
Absolutely.
will come out of it victorious.
So considering all of the hardships that you underwent, and I know we spoke a little bit briefly before we jumped on this call or this podcast about having undergone a hernia surgery yourself. Can you tell
Yes.
us a little bit about that procedure and like the timeline of when that was happening?
Right. I was in my 50s, I think, when that came about. I had an inguinal hernia and an umbilical hernia at
Mhm.
the same time. It just came. I may have just lifted too much weight or something like that. I don't know. At some point it went. I think especially men are vulnerable to the inguinal hernia. Somehow the testicle path or whatever is
Mhm.
there to let go. Well, mine did let go, and so I don't know. I lived with it for about a year and decided that I just don't have the time or energy to try and deal with it naturally. So I contacted a surgeon, discussed the options, read the studies about the American problems with the different meshes, brought it up with the surgeon, and he assured me that the Canadian health system was using different materials and that we don't have that problem here.
Mm.
Hey, so, so of course, by then I was already running this business. So I had access to a lot of tools and I used detoxes. I definitely upped my zeolite and I was using a proteolytic or fibrinolytic
Right.
enzyme
Mhm.
to deal with that.
Okay.
So I was on a fairly heavy dose. What in the world? Sorry about this ringing. By the way, did you hear the ringing from the phone?
I did not.
Okay, so this is just in my system is ringing loud and it's not picking it up.
It's not. We're good.
Yeah,
So
okay.
you're taking
Yeah, no,
these
I'm sorry.
proteolytic enzymes.
So I was quite prepared for this and I decided that the fibrinolytic proteolytic enzymes would be a good thing. Fibrinolytic means dissolving fibrin, which is what scar tissue is made of. And so I wanted to come up with the minimum of adhesions after the
Mhm.
operation. So I was on a fairly heavy dose of the product I was taking is mainly serapeptase. The brand was Generation Plus. We actually to this day carry it in our store.
Okay. Very
Um,
good. Yeah, I know that the serapeptase is often used for people who've had a lot of abdominal surgeries, even in the uterine cavity and things like that, people who've been dealing with endometriosis. So that's a good enzyme for that. And I guess with the hernia world, there's the misconception that we want that scar tissue there to bridge the gap, to solidify that defect in the abdomen. But we don't need necessarily the scar tissue accumulating and causing additional problems with your organs.
yeah, I would see it exactly the opposite, where the body will fix any gap with the scar tissue quickly, right? That's the quick heal. And on the surface, you will see that this is the scar that you see. Well, on the inside, it's there too. And it's usually a ridge of tissue where the cells are supposed to connect naturally with no gap. But here you have the scar tissue in the gap. So
Mhm.
the enzyme is able to dissolve it slowly, and normal cells will bridge the gap. So you will actually be closer to as good as new as before the cut.
Yeah, yeah. And I've been doing a lot of research on different probiotics, prebiotics, and even like butyrate producers in the diet and as supplements that they're showing beneficial for, again, the same type of scenario where people are having abdominal surgeries and preventing the cascade of adhesions forming. But
Exactly.
I
You're right.
appreciate you sharing that. And for our listeners, again, we have a lot of people coming on, either they themselves have undergone a surgery or someone they love, but unfortunately, they've either had the polypropylene or the polyester mesh that has caused either the pain, the chronic pain from migration or bowel perforation, any kind of complications like that. But there's also the systemic issues happening. And I think with an approach that you have, where you were kind of not you probably worked on pre-tox, like preparing your body for surgery, but also you're doing all the right things after surgery. And
Mhm.
I'm sure that you probably have that as a fundamental piece, and correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of the clients that you work with now, like who
Mhm.
comes to see you and how do you help them?
Well, it's the American nutritional disaster. 75% of the population is now in chronic inflammatory, degenerative,
Yeah.
metabolic disease.
Mm-hmm.
So they are the popular ways to get there: blood pressure issues, blood glucose issues, cancer, you name it. All these different illnesses, all of them being metabolic and a failure of the food supply and the industrial toxicity and the failure of the medical system and all of these. I would call it the industrial age problems. And so I've started thinking about it in four categories, which would be toxicity, malnutrition, stagnation, and trauma.
Yes.
And the trauma is mostly the emotional business that we pick up along the way. All of us have misconceptions stuck in our subconscious, and they need to be dealt with. They should be resolved. And I couldn't recommend more people going in with, I don't know, body talk or EFT or
Yes.
you name it. Any one of the methods. If you want to talk about it, we can go in depth. I actually took training as clinical hypnotherapist. So I trained in the how to clear the subconscious, but I couldn't do it to myself. So I had to go to colleagues to help me. And so clearing that, clear your mommy issues, daddy issues, brother issues, whatever else, that all has to come out.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a piece that I never considered before my own illness, but it is pivotal. Like if you don't address it, and that's one of the reasons why I keep craniosacral therapy. The person I work with, she does integration of parts with me while we're doing the craniosacral, and it's just amazing just going in there and feeling that release and being able to talk to the manager part in me or whoever else is the one that's feeling triggered at the time.
Right. Yes.
So talk to us. Go ahead.
Um, well, all of this is connected. The electric system in our body, the traditional Chinese medicine with its 26 meridians or 13 pairs of meridians and all of the different points and all these different emotions are attached to the different organs, to the different channels. So you might be having a liver moment where you're dealing with some anger or whatever. Like I don't want to get into it too deep, but it's all connected. There's a map. You can follow it.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's that. The stagnation is a dangerous thing, especially because the lymphatic system doesn't have its own pump. We have to move. Our physical design is based on walking probably 5-6 miles a day.
Mm,
So we do need movement.
right.
Up, down is important. So if you end up being not mobile, you might want to consider one of the vibration plates that you are able to actually help the lymphatic system to pump things away.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the case with people, again, having surgery. They're probably, resting more than they ever have. And in my case, I was severely disabled from day one. So I was primarily bedbound for over 4 months. And that stagnation was probably one of the most detrimental things that was happening, just the lack of movement. And then also the digestive issues that come along with that.
Right.
So,
Yeah, isn't it amazing how well your bowel moves when you walk 3 miles?
yeah,
If you
right.
So those are the two. The third one is malnutrition. The food like highly processed objects that we are presented with that are so seductive, we shouldn't eat. So we need to compensate somehow for the deficiency of the nutrient poor, calorie rich diets that we enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
So for that, I actually have on the side, I have a business that manufactures superfood blends.
Oh, tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, nutritionally, you need vitamins, minerals, phenols, terpenes, all kinds of things. If you eat a diet that's quite rich in grains, like something like a breakfast cereal or a pizza pocket or something like that, that is super deficient in the nutrients. And so your body will be asking you for nutrients and you will be giving it too many calories and not enough nutrients. So this merry-go-round continues and you put on weight if your nutrient density is too low in the food you take.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's probably enough on that topic. Okay, so the way we make these foods, we start with chlorella, spirulina, alfalfa, sprouted grasses, and all of that. Add to it all kinds of components. We have about 350 ingredients in the library that we put together. And depending on the body type, you may need speeding up or you may need slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I should mention the metabolic typing.
Yes.
Metabolic typing advisor.
Yes,
And
yes.
it reflects biological individuality. There are two major types, oxidizers and autonomics, which shows you how you alkalize or how you acidify. And the acidification, that sends you into fight, flight, anxiety, nervousness, anger, those type of emotions, impatient, too quick to respond. Whereas the over-alkalinity sends you into procrastination and despondence and oversharing and being too emotional and too far in depression.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in the sympathetic side of the autonomic nervous system, you are in the fight or flight. If you're in the parasympathetic, you're in the rest, repair, digest. So one person is pushed there by eating fats and proteins and taken out by taking carbohydrates. So the autonomic is alkalized by carbohydrates and acidified by fats and proteins. But the oxidizer is the other way around, alkalized by fats and proteins and acidified by carbs. So you could be sending yourself into depression and anxiety by miscombining your foods. And you could be even doing the same thing on one day where you're going to be swinging from depression to anxiety and back. And it's controllable with food.
Yeah, that's the hard part. How do you assess, as a functional diagnostic nutrition, we also use metabolic typing, but how do you assess and how do you determine what a person is and if they're sympathetic or parasympathetic?
Yeah, well, it's experiential, empirical. You give yourself a carb dose and see what happens. So eat a banana with a bit of porridge and let's just see. It'll send you into a carb reaction. You will either start acidifying, start being nervous and anxious and short-tempered, or you'll be alkalizing, which will send you into despondent and sleepy. And then we can do a retest with a bunch of fats, like a spoonful of coconut oil. You eat that, and 20 minutes later, you'll be either alkaline or acidic. Take a pick. And they should be the opposite reaction, right? Mm-hmm. So once you know, all you have to do is just start messing with the ratios of these macronutrients on your plate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that could be variable too throughout the day too, right? Like whatever macronutrient ratio you have for breakfast might not necessarily be the best for dinner.
Well, interestingly, so there are some people which we call variable, and some people are variable intraday. And in women, we find some variability intracycle. Up to the luteal, they're one type, and post-luteal, they're another. So I myself, for example, I do best on a breakfast of a fruit salad or something like that. But by the dinner time, I'm not a vegetarian.
Right.
So anyway, it doesn't matter. Each one of us has some biological individuality, and we are different. And
Yes.
each person, maybe some are more stable, some are less so. So people who are more stable, they don't see or perceive as much of a swing or as much of a difference, whereas others are easily pushed from one side to the other.
Yes. And in the beginning of my chronic illness journey, I was following pretty much a vegan type diet.
Yeah.
And I thought, I have to eliminate the impacts of digestion, like minimize what my body has to do. But I didn't realize eating raw food at the time. Raw food was not doing that. And so I was noticing trends towards hypoglycemia a lot. Whether I made smoothies for breakfast didn't work for me. But I did it for about a year just because that was the
Yeah.
cure or the fad diet for dysautonomia at the time. It just did not work well for me at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you might have been just fine on chicken soup.
Yes, which is what I do now. I'm primarily like the modified GAPS diet, very, very high in fat, high in protein. I'm still very minimal carb. So my carb intake is about 5 to 10% of my diet.
Right.
And I'm still tweaking that as I go because I feel as a person, their function resumes. They might not necessarily maintain that same dietary need. And also supplementation plays a role.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, there's definitely variance. So any one person should make sure they understand that they are unique. So do not follow your neighbor's diet.
right.
I remember this one gal, she called me up. She said, I'm reading about this grapefruit diet. I want to lose some weight. And she was parasympathetic dominant. I knew it already. I said, you're going to regret it. Don't do it. It's going to be terrible. She called me on day 3 and she's saying, I have never been feeling so horrible in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
Anyway,
learning lesson.
yeah. Okay, so there's this other thing engaged in metabolic typing. We also check for endocrine dominance, which regulates or controls how you gain weight or lose weight. And so different body types, different endocrine dominances will do differently. One person will gain weight with fat and lose weight with starch, but another person will have a completely opposite experience. So there are people who go on a keto diet and start losing weight, and there are others who will do the same thing and start gaining weight. Sure. You need to understand which type you are before you engage.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. And so some of those endocrine types, you specify which organ they would be, either thyroid or pituitary.
Yes, thyroid, pituitary, or adrenal. And in women, we also find gonadal or ovarian dominance.
Okay.
Those are fairly, well, they're not that uncommon. If you overdo the hot foods, you will stimulate the estrogen production, and so you will accentuate the secondary feminine characteristics. So wider hips and yeah, like Jennifer Lopez comes to mind. From the waist up, you're one size, and from the waist down, you +2 or something like that.
And so that kind of links back to the genetics of it. It's the metabolic typing goes hand in hand without having to test the genes, but you can assess how ancestrally the body should be consuming the foods and picking up the nutrients, right?
Yeah, you certainly have the option of going with a whole lot of testing,
right,
which is not that inexpensive, and you get a lot of answers. Like you'll have it on paper, or you can go empirically by just testing what happens and just journaling a bit and seeing what makes you lose your cool and what makes you go to sleep and things like that. Like acidity is associated with jittery and short-tempered and shaky on the inside, and alkaline is associated with stable but perhaps undermotivated.
So we want that balance still. Whichever one is our strength, whichever one is stronger, we want to put emphasis on the opposite side so that we bring it to balance.
Right, exactly. Gives you
Okay.
more flexibility in your reactions and responses.
Okay, very good, very good. So I guess the next thing that we would want to know is whenever a client comes to you, first, like, I don't know what percentage of clients come to you with chronic disability versus something that's been more acute.
Yeah, it's usually when they reach the end of their patience with the mainstream.
Right.
The meme, the pharmaceutical industry has been in control of all the mainstream television, radio. They have taken over Google and Facebook, so they are pretty well embedded in the message. So their approach to life is, let's make them sick a little and then give them a prescription for something that's going to make the symptoms less intense, but not so good that they would stop coming.
Right, lifelong patient.
It's not a cure, it's a treatment. So at some point, some people come to the realization that that's not going to work, or that it's not the best way of doing it.
Mhm.
So once they're ready, they seek people out like you or me, where they no longer want to take 4 or 5 or 6 prescription medications and instead want to feel right. So
Mhm.
that's where we are.
Mhm. So
Once you've discovered that it is actually the toxicity that's causing the problem, you will have to conclude that adding toxic drugs to it is not the way to go.
exactly, puts way more burden on the body to clear those pharmaceuticals and then the byproducts that are happening too.
Right. Yeah, you're not having side effects, you're having effects that you don't really want.
Right.
Yeah.
So if a person wants to reach out and learn more about your practice and also want to know how they would enter a practice like yours, where would they go?
Well, the business that I have started 20 years ago is called Life Enthusiast. So life-enthusiast.com, you'll find us there. You'll find access to the health coaching or all the different products that we make available.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many because, of course, human bodies break down in such creative, various ways.
Yeah.
If you can think of it, it's like the last straw that breaks the camel's back. The mainstream says, well, if it wasn't this one thing, it cannot be its fault. But in a way, it is, because we get up to the breaking point doing various things, and then any one thing can take us down, whether it's an emotional breakdown, some tragic event in the life, or a car accident, or any one, I don't know, food poisoning could be the last straw that takes you
Yes.
down. And
Right.
then you go from coping to not coping. Your immune system is in full flare and you're just down.
All right. Right. The immune system gets exhausted after some time, or
Right.
whichever system. Now, you just kind of touched on something that I want to reiterate for our audience is that you may have been able to tolerate certain things up until a certain point, and so you don't make that association that, oh, it can't be this, I'm not going to say this injection of whatever kind, you know.
Yes, right.
But like you mentioned, your body gets to a point where enough is enough. That toxin bucket is overloaded, it's overfilled, and it just has to come out one way or another. It has to stop the body or allow the body time to rest, which might be the trigger, like what people experience chronic fatigue and other symptoms that they don't make the association to some other ailment.
Right. So you have this metabolic disease. Your mitochondria are not converting food into energy properly. Either it's lack of oxygen or bad function or presence of toxins that are blocking the normal functioning within the cells. So if you have cytotoxicity, if you're full of stuff that you should not be full of, then you must drain it.
Mm.
And that's the industrial age toxins. They could be coming from water, air, stuff we wear, cosmetics, furniture, you name it, all of that environmental stuff, the glade that somebody plugged in and you're inhaling, the cigarette that somebody smoked. It could be any one thing that will take you over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the plastics.
Right, right. Microplastics everywhere in our food, in our, like you mentioned, the personal care products in our waterways. So all of those personal care products that we're using, some of them do have microplastics in, and it's going back into our water stream, our waterways. It's not going directly back into a water treatment plant, but if it enters our water sources, and then we have our fish and wildlife consuming that, it's kind of a vicious cycle because we just can't escape it.
Yeah, it's rising. And then there's the gut health, the microbiome. There are two main things that wreck it. One is chlorine. If you are drinking chlorinated tap water, stop. The other thing is glyphosate. Roundup, or glyphosate, which is the main ingredient in that, was actually originally patented as an antibiotic. It works by killing the microbes at the root of the plant. So you apply this herbicide, but it's not really killing the plant. It's killing the microbes, denying the plant the ability to absorb nutrients. Well, if it gets into your gut, and it will if you're eating grains that have been treated with this, and even trace amounts are bad enough.
Right.
It will act as an antibiotic in your gut.
For sure. Yeah, and that disrupts the microbiome. And like you mentioned, you'll have gut dysbiosis and hormone imbalances because a lot of our hormones are made in the gut. So with that, and then the glyphosate piece, people think, oh, if I don't eat wheat, I'm safe. But there's the additional grains, and then the desiccating process is partly too. So if they're not grown or sprayed while growing, then you have to make sure that the life cycle of that grain is free of those glyphosates or those desiccants. So you can.
These days it's on lentils and garbanzos, and
Yeah.
You think you're buying yourself a healthy food called hummus. Well, if it wasn't made with organic garbanzos, you're in trouble.
Right, right. And is there any instance, we want to always opt for organic food, but is there any instance or anything beyond that we should be looking for?
Yeah, pretty hard to get these days. I mean, there is such a thing as bio or dynamic, grown with the Rudolf Steiner method in mind. It's rare. It's hard to find.
Right.
Grow your own.
Grow your own. Yeah, that's my next goal. I'm starting my own garden, and I'm starting easy with some herbs and some of the sulfur vegetables. So I'm gonna definitely pick that up because, as you mentioned, unless you have local farmers that you're well acquainted with their practices, you really don't know what you're getting from the grocery store.
Yeah.
So before we end off, I wanted to see if there's anything you would want to parse out to our listeners that would benefit them in their struggles if they're pursuing this kind of mindset shift into the health space. And what would you have them do?
Yeah, very, very good point. It's the mind shift. It's the emotional health that's at the top of it. But once you understand the metabolic typing, you will know that food can help you get out of either depression or anxiety. You can bring yourself closer to center. There are supplements that help to stabilize the neurotransmitters. I think gut health is supremely important, and humic and fulvic acid is one of those underappreciated important supplements that just have great benefits for human health.
Yeah.
Meditate
for sure. Yeah, some kind of mindfulness practice in there, and unplugging from technology, from news, social media, any negative energy that's around.
Find a good EFT practitioner or learn it yourself, and learn how language, how you speak to yourself, how you express things is important. Watch your inner dialogue. Stop blaming. Focus on gratitude, and give up grievances. Yeah, that would be probably the best health technologies I can offer. Many of us have been victimized by the system. Like, we have been done wrong, no question about it. But so long as you are dwelling on the suffering that's been inflicted upon you, you're going to be carrying the ball. Learn to call it a learning lesson. Oh, look at that. What happened? Well, that was awful. How am I going to overcome that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Rather than they did it to me, they owe me,
Yeah.
they are, I don't want to point too many fingers, but being a victim is not a constructive place to be.
Yeah. And you can point the finger at me because in the beginning, I blamed the surgeons wholeheartedly, like 100% it was their fault.
And it totally was their fault. They should have done better, right?
Mm.
But they will not fix you.
They won't, right? And instead, they'll pack you, they'll shift you off to another specialist, and you just go into that, like you mentioned, the conventional medicine where you might see 15 or so different specialists and not get any closer to regaining function or, feeling
Right.
restored.
That is because they never look for the root cause. They only treat the symptom. It is the entire education system that they have invented to the point where the whole society does not actually look at the root cause. For example, the war on drugs. Such a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we not asking, why are the people so emotionally distraught that they want to shut off how they feel? That is the cause of people taking drugs. Drug dealers are a consequence of that.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? I mean, what's the word? Expand it into any other area that you're looking at. Every profession that I have ever investigated, I find is corrupted by people with their focus on symptoms. That the biggest seduction of marketing is, I'll give you the easy button, the silver bullet, the one thing you need to do, and then everything will be fine. Such a lie.
It takes work. It takes work to actually get to a functional state and to improve your health and stay on that track. And like you mentioned, not take the easy button because that's just going to perpetuate down the road negative.
Yeah.
So I know, and you mentioned your website, and again, before we let off, if you can give that to our audience, but I know you have a lot of different products that you have available, and I found it pretty fascinating. You have things related to EMF and supplement lines. So, let the audience know what they can find, and again, where they can find it.
Well, people who are in your type of audience would find help with symptoms. Like, for example, we have this product called Amazing Soak. It delivers gigantic amounts of oxygen to your tissues. Like, you can take one bath in with this substance and all fatigue goes away. Easy button, right? Well,
what was the name of that product?
It's called Amazing Soak.
Okay.
If you type the word amazing, you will find some incredible results. And this thing is so good that it actually it raises ORP in such way that fungal, bacterial, even viral life forms do not survive. So you can spray it on surfaces or you can inhale it and it will just shut off an infection just overnight.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's an example, right? Like, you do not find this anywhere mainstream.
Mm-mm.
Or you want to deal with fatigue? Well, we can probably help you with MSM, methylsulfonyl methane. Most people respond phenomenally. I've had a lady calling me, is this all it took? 3 days of 3 teaspoons of MSM and my 20-year bout of chronic fatigue is over? Right? Little solutions like that. They are just simply not known. You can say that the Life Enthusiast website is the result of about 40 years of research into chronic degenerative disease, the metabolic disease. So everything that happens there, whether it's free-form aminos or whether it's food products or detox support, all of that is available. And we have tested it. We've been around. There are thousands I think about 60,000 people that we have worked with.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty key right there. Just knowing that it's science backed or it's clinically backed to show this improvement. So we
Right.
appreciate that. And so the audience, again, you can visit the website and we'll have it on our show notes. So again, Martin, thank you so much for being on the show. It was invaluable, all the information you provided, and I'm looking forward to perusing your shop a little more.
Thank you. It's an honor, really. I appreciate the path you took and where you are today relative to where you were. It's awesome.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our listeners. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.
Thank you.
Stop the recording here.